The lawyer cleared his throat and stopped the room. My sister froze with the house keys still in her hand. And for the first time since our parents died, I smiled. Not because I was winning, but because I finally understood what had been happening to me. If you're still here, listening, I want you to stay with me for a minute. Not to take sides. Not to judge. Just to sit inside the quiet of a story that looks simple on the outside and feels very different once you're living in it. I promise this isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. And about what happens when someone assumes you'll stay silent forever. It started on a grey morning that felt heavier than it should have. The kind of morning where the air presses down on your shoulders before you've even had coffee. I remember standing in front of my childhood home, the place I'd left, but never stopped belonging to, watching my sister change the locks. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't look guilty. She just told me, very calmly, that it was legal. That word stuck with me. Legal. Not right. Not fair. Not kind. Just legal. As if legality was supposed to replace grief. As if paperwork could override decades of shared memories, late-night talks, inside jokes only sisters understand. I nodded. I stepped back. I didn't cry. And that seemed to confuse her more than anything else. People expect explosions in moments like that. Screaming. Accusations. Tears on the front lawn. But grief doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it drains you so completely that there's no room left for drama. Sometimes all you can do is observe. And wait. That's what I did. I waited through the awkward texts that went unanswered. Through the quiet removal of my name from utility bills. Through the way neighbors suddenly stopped waving, because they'd been told a story that wasn't mine. I waited because something inside me didn't feel finished. The will reading was scheduled 2 weeks later. A small conference room. Beige walls. Bad coffee. The kind of place where life-changing decisions happen without ceremony. I sat across from my sister, hands folded, listening to her breathe like she already knew the ending. She believed she had done everything correctly. She believed silence meant agreement. She believed I didn't understand what was happening. And maybe that was the hardest part. Being underestimated by someone who grew up beside you. Someone who knew your tells. Your fears. Your soft spots. Or at least thought she did. The lawyer had been reading in a steady voice, one clause after another, when something shifted. It was subtle. A pause too long. A finger resting on a page instead of turning it. Then he looked up. He didn't look at me first. He looked at her. And he asked one question. Just one. Not loud. Not dramatic. Precise. In that moment, everything she'd built on confidence began to wobble. And everything I'd been carrying quietly finally had somewhere to land. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say I told you so. I just watched the truth arrive on its own. I know how this sounds. Like a courtroom story. Like a setup for applause. But that's not what this is. There was no cheering. No instant relief. Just a slow, undeniable shift in power. The kind that doesn't come from shouting, but from patience. Before I tell you how we got there, I need you to understand something. I loved my sister. Deeply. I trusted her with things I never told anyone else. This wasn't a stranger taking advantage of me. This was family. And that's why the quiet hurt more than the betrayal itself. So if you've ever been the one who stayed calm, while someone else rewrote the rules. If you've ever been locked out of a life you thought was shared, stay with me. This story isn't about what she took. It's about what she forgot I knew. Before any of this happened, my life felt settled. Not perfect. Just steady in a way I trusted. I was living about 40 minutes away from our parents' house, close enough to help, far enough to breathe. I had a job I didn't hate, a small apartment with uneven floors, and a routine that made sense to me. Coffee in the same mug every morning. Evening walks without headphones. Quiet weekends that didn't feel lonely. My sister, Mara, lived much closer to our parents. She always had. After college, she moved back home temporarily, and somehow that temporary stretch turned into years. She helped with groceries, doctor appointments, paperwork. She knew which drawer the warranties were in. Which neighbor had a spare key. Everyone praised her for it. Including me. When people asked how our parents were doing, they looked at her, not me. And I was okay with that. I trusted her. She sounded capable. Organized. Calm. I told myself we balanced each other out. She handled logistics. I handled emotions. We talked almost every day. Sometimes about practical things, sometimes about nothing at all. She'd complain about the creaky stairs, or how Dad refused to stop eating salty food. I'd listen. I'd joke. I'd say, "You're doing so much. Don't forget to rest." She'd laugh and tell me she had it under control. When our mom got sick, then our dad not long after, the house changed. The air felt thicker. Conversations became shorter. Everything revolved around schedules, medications, insurance forms. I visited as often as I could, but I was still the one who left at the end of the day. She stayed. And slowly, without announcing it, she became the gatekeeper. She decided when it was a good time for me to visit. She decided what the doctors really meant. She decided which conversations were too much for our parents. I noticed it, but I didn't challenge it. Grief makes you cautious. You don't want to add tension where there's already so much loss waiting in the room. After our parents passed, within 3 months of each other, everything went quiet. Not peaceful. Empty. The house felt frozen in time. Their coats still on the hooks. The calendar still open to the month Dad forgot to flip. I stood in the kitchen one afternoon, staring at the scratch on the counter from when we were kids and tried to remember how a place could feel both full and hollow at the same time. Mara moved fast after that. Faster than I expected. She said it was easier if one of us handled things. She said she'd already spoken to a lawyer friend. She said we could sort out the details later. Later sounded reasonable. Later always does. I didn't ask for documents. I didn't ask for copies. I assumed we were grieving in parallel, just at different speeds. I assumed love was enough of a safeguard. We'd sit at the dining table, surrounded by piles of papers, and she'd summarize instead of show. I'd nod. I trusted the summaries. They came with confidence, and confidence can feel like competence when you're tired. Looking back, there were small moments that didn't quite land right. She'd pause before answering certain questions. She'd say things like, "It's just simpler this way." She'd avoid eye contact when money came up. Nothing explosive. Nothing obvious. Just subtle shifts. And I remember one night, standing by my car after a long day, keys in my hand, when she said, almost casually, "I'll take care of the house stuff. You don't need to worry about that." The way she said, "don't need to worry," stayed with me. It wasn't reassuring. It was dismissive. Like a door closing softly instead of slamming. I told myself I was imagining it. That grief was making me suspicious. That siblings handle loss differently. Now let me ask you something before I go further. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was off, but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone in this. At the time, I believed we were still standing on the same side of the line. That whatever decisions were being made for us, not instead of me. I believed that blood meant protection. That history meant fairness. That silence meant respect. I didn't know yet that silence can also be permission. And I didn't realize how much ground had already shifted beneath my feet. The first real crack didn't come from a fight. It came from a sentence that was meant to reassure me. We were sitting in her car, parked outside the house, the engine still running. She hadn't turned it off yet, like she wasn't fully committed to the conversation. I'd asked, casually, when we were planning to meet with the estate lawyer together. She smiled, eyes forward, hands on the steering wheel. "Oh, that's already taken care of," she said. I signed what needed to be signed. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. I remember the exact feeling in my chest. Not anger. Not fear. Just a sudden drop, like missing a step on a staircase. A physical realization that I didn't know where I stood anymore. I asked what she meant. She told me not to stress. She said everything was standard. She said the lawyer confirmed it was all straightforward. Standard. Straightforward. Words that close conversations instead of opening them. I didn't push. Not then. I nodded, unbuckled my seatbelt, and got out of the car. I told myself I'd misunderstood. That she was just overwhelmed. That I could ask later, when emotions weren't so raw. But that night, lying in bed, my mind wouldn't quiet down. Why hadn't I been there? Why hadn't she told me ahead of time? Why did it feel like something had already moved without me? I started replaying past conversations. Little things I'd brushed off. The way she'd said my house instead of the house. The way she talked about renovations like decisions had already been made. The way she stopped asking my opinion altogether. The next week, I stopped by the house unannounced. Not to confront her. Just to see. To ground myself in something familiar. My key didn't work. I stood there longer than I should have, trying again, checking the number on the key like it might magically change. When the door didn't open, I felt that same hollow drop, only deeper this time. She opened it from the inside, surprised but composed. "Oh," she said. "I meant to tell you. I had the locks changed." There was no apology in her voice. No explanation offered. I asked why. She shrugged, like we were talking about replacing a light bulb. "It's just easier this way. And it's legal." There it was again. That word. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stepped back onto the porch and nodded. I said okay. I told her I'd call later. Inside, my instincts were fully awake now. Something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I tried to get information the way you do when you don't want to accuse someone outright. I asked neutral questions. I requested copies of documents. I suggested we sit down together and go over things. Each request was met with a delay. Or a deflection. Or reassurance without substance. "You're worrying too much. Trust me. I've got this handled." Those phrases started to feel heavy. Like weights placed carefully to keep me from moving. I called the lawyer's office whose name she'd mentioned. I didn't accuse. I just asked for general information about the process. The receptionist was polite, but vague. She told me they couldn't discuss anything without authorization. Authorization. Another door. That was the moment I stopped trying to be agreeable. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I watched instead. I paid attention to what she said, and what she didn't. I noticed how quickly she moved to secure things. How confidently she spoke about outcomes that hadn't been shared with me. I realized she believed I wouldn't challenge her. That grief had softened me into compliance. Pause for a second. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted her right then, or waited and watched? Drop your answer below. I really want to know. I chose to wait. Not because I was afraid, but because something told me that if I moved too soon, I'd lose access to the truth entirely. And I needed facts. Not assumptions. Not feelings. Just facts. That decision, to stay quiet a little longer, would cost me emotionally. But it would also give me something I didn't have yet. Leverage. And once I understood that, I stopped feeling confused. I started feeling prepared. Waiting changes you. At first, it feels passive, almost weak. Like you're letting things happen instead of shaping them. But over time, waiting sharpens your awareness. You notice patterns. You hear what's underneath the words. I started documenting everything. Dates. Times. Who said what? Not obsessively. Quietly. Methodically. The way you do when you sense reality might later be disputed. I requested bank statements under the pretense of helping with taxes. She sent summaries instead. I asked about the house insurance. She said it was already updated. I asked whose name it was under. She didn't answer that one at all. Then came the mail. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. Forwarded. The return address was a financial institution I recognized from our parents' paperwork. My name was on it. Correctly spelled. No mistakes. Inside was a notice about an account closure. An account I didn't know had been closed. I read the letter twice before it fully registered. It referenced an estate account, recently settled. The balance transferred. The authorization signed. There was only one signature listed. Not mine. I didn't panic. That surprised me. I felt strangely calm, like my body had already processed this possibility before my mind caught up. I called the number on the letter. This time, I didn't ask general questions. I asked specific ones. I gave my full name. My parents' names. Dates. The woman on the line hesitated. She placed me on hold. When she came back, her tone had shifted. More careful. More formal. She told me she couldn't give me details, but she could confirm that documents had been submitted on my behalf. On my behalf. I asked how that was possible without my signature. Another pause. She said, "You should speak to the estate attorney." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because something fundamental had cracked. The version of my sister I'd trusted didn't fit the evidence anymore. And once that happens, you can't unsee it. I went back through old messages. Screenshots. Voicemails. The casual way she'd said things like, "I'll handle it," or "You don't need to be involved in this part." At the time, it sounded considerate. Now it sounded strategic. The next discovery came by accident. A neighbor I'd known since childhood ran into me at the grocery store. We exchanged the usual condolences, the awkward smiles. Then she said, "It's nice that your sister decided to keep the house. I thought you'd be moving back in." I asked what she meant. She looked confused. She said Mara told everyone the house had been left entirely to her. That it was what our parents wanted. That I'd already agreed. I stood there, holding a basket of things I didn't remember picking up, and realized my absence had been narrated for me. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. This wasn't just betrayal. This was my whole life collapsing. The shared assumptions. The unspoken trust. The belief that I mattered in decisions about my own family. Have you ever been blindsided like this? If you've been there, share your story below. We heal better together. The final confirmation came when I requested a copy of the will directly from the courthouse. I expected resistance. I expected delays. What I didn't expect was how ordinary it all was. The clerk handed me the file without ceremony. No drama. No warning. Just paper. I sat in my car and read it line by line. The will hadn't changed. Not in the way Mara had implied. It clearly named us both. Equal beneficiaries. Equal rights. The house was to be shared or sold, proceeds divided. There was no clause giving her sole authority. No permission for unilateral decisions. What she'd done wasn't legal. It was just quiet. I closed the folder and sat there longer than I needed to. Letting the reality settle. Letting the grief take a new shape. The lowest point isn't when you realize someone hurt you. It's when you realize they believed you wouldn't notice. That they thought so little of your awareness, your intelligence, your resolve, that they were willing to gamble everything on your silence. I didn't cry then. I felt something colder. Clearer. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. Not about what she deserved. But about who I was going to be next. Once you see the truth clearly, emotion stops being useful. That surprised me. I'd expected rage. Or at least tears. But what settled in instead was focus. The kind that narrows your vision and steadies your hands. I didn't confront her right away. Not after the courthouse. Not after the bank letter. Not even after hearing what she'd told the neighbors. Confrontation would have given her time to adjust her story. To prepare. To harden. I needed control. And control comes from patience. The first thing I did was consult my own attorney. Quietly. Privately. I didn't ask for drama. I asked for clarity. I brought everything I had. The will. The bank notice. My notes. The timeline I'd been building without realizing it. He didn't interrupt much. He just listened. When he finally spoke, he said, "You were smart not to sign anything." That sentence alone was grounding. He explained my options in plain language. No threats. No promises. Just facts. What she'd done wasn't uncommon. It was often disguised as caretaking. But it didn't hold up under scrutiny. I told him I didn't want to punish her. I didn't want to embarrass her. I just wanted my life back. My name. My place. He nodded. He said that was reasonable. So we made a plan. Not an aggressive one. A precise one. We requested a formal reading of the will. In person. With both of us present. We notified the estate attorney she'd been using. We asked for a full accounting of all actions taken under the estate. Everything above board. Everything documented. At the same time, I began pulling myself back together in quieter ways. I went back to routines I'd neglected. Morning walks. Cooking meals instead of skipping them. Calling friends I hadn't wanted to burden before. I reminded myself that I was still here. Still capable. Still whole. I also stopped explaining myself. When Mara asked why I wanted a will reading, I said, I think it's time we were both present. Nothing more. When she told me it was unnecessary, I said, I disagree. Calmly. Once. She didn't push after that. In the days leading up to the meeting, I felt strangely detached. Like I was watching myself from a distance. I wasn't fantasizing about outcomes. I wasn't rehearsing speeches. I trusted the process. That trust didn't come from blind optimism. It came from preparation. Here's where I made my choice. Do you believe in revenge, or in walking away? When someone destroys your trust, what's the right move? Comment below. I want both sides. I didn't want revenge. Revenge keeps you tethered to the person who hurt you. I wanted release. And release requires truth in the open. The night before the reading, I slept through the entire night for the first time in weeks. No racing thoughts. No replaying conversations. Just rest. In the morning, I chose clothes that made me feel like myself. Nothing symbolic. Nothing dramatic. Just familiar. When I walked into that conference room, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. Whatever happened next wouldn't be about emotion. It would be about facts. And facts, I'd learned, have a way of speaking for themselves. The room was smaller than I expected. A long table. 3 chairs on one side. 2 on the other. A legal pad in front of each seat like we were all supposed to take the same kind of notes. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Mara arrived first. She was already seated when I walked in, back straight, hands folded. She smiled when she saw me. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Just, confidently. Like someone who believes the ending is already written. I took my seat without saying much. I didn't look at her longer than necessary. I didn't avoid her either. Neutral. Balanced. The lawyer entered last. He nodded to both of us and sat down. Opened the folder. Adjusted his glasses. He began reading. Names. Dates. Clauses. The language was familiar now. I'd read it all before. But hearing it aloud felt different. More solid. Less abstract. Mara shifted in her seat when he reached the section about the house. He read it slowly. Clearly. Equal beneficiaries. Shared ownership. Joint decision-making. Her jaw tightened. Just slightly. He continued. Then he paused. Not a dramatic pause. Not the kind that begs attention. Just long enough to feel intentional. He looked up at her. And asked, very calmly, can you explain why you authorized the transfer of estate funds and changed the property locks without the co-beneficiary's consent? The room went quiet. This is the moment everything changed. Be honest. Are you rooting for me right now, or do you think I went too far? Tell me in the comments. I can take it. Mara blinked. Once. Twice. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but the confidence had shifted. It was thinner now. I was acting in the estate's best interest, she said. Someone had to take responsibility. The lawyer nodded. Not in agreement. Just acknowledgement. And on what legal basis did you assume sole authority? He asked. She glanced at me. Just for a second. I thought, given that I was living there and handling the care. That's not what I asked, he said, still calm. Did you have written consent? Silence. He turned a page. Did you have a power of attorney that survived death? Another pause. Her foot tapped once under the table. No, she said. The word landed flat. The lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He simply explained. Point by point. What the will allowed. What it didn't. What actions had exceeded that authority. He used phrases like unauthorized, reversible, subject to correction. Mara's posture changed. She leaned back. Crossed her arms. Defensive now. I didn't react. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. When the lawyer finished, he closed the folder. Moving forward, he said, all estate actions will require joint approval. Any unilateral changes already made will be reviewed, and if necessary, undone. He looked at me then. Just briefly. Do you have anything you'd like to add? I shook my head. No. That seemed to surprise him. It definitely surprised her. We sat there for a moment longer, the room recalibrating around a new reality. No applause. No victory speech. Just a quiet rebalancing of power. When we stood to leave, Mara didn't say anything. She gathered her things quickly. Avoided my eyes. At the door, she hesitated. Like she wanted to say something. Or maybe like she wanted me to. I didn't. Some endings don't need dialogue. They just need acknowledgement. And as I walked out into the hallway, I felt something I hadn't felt since before all of this began. Relief. Not because I'd won. But because I'd finally been seen. The days after the meeting were quieter than I expected. Not calm. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has been set down and your body hasn't quite caught up yet. I kept waiting for a surge of emotion. Relief. Sadness. Anger, even. But mostly, I felt tired. Tired in a clean way. The practical changes came first. The locks were changed back. My key worked again. That small, metallic click felt louder than it should have. The estate accounts were reviewed, corrected, and split properly. Numbers moved back where they belonged. My name reappeared in places it had quietly disappeared from. But the emotional changes took longer. I went back to the house alone one afternoon. Not to claim anything. Just to sit. I walked through each room slowly, letting the memories come without pushing them away. The living room where we'd watched movies with our parents. The hallway where height marks were still penciled into the wall. The kitchen table that had seen both ordinary breakfasts and life-altering conversations. Nothing about the house had changed. But I had. I didn't feel the urge to reclaim it. Or to hold on to it out of sentiment. I felt something closer to closure. Like I could finally see it clearly, without the weight of what had been taken layered on top. Mara and I spoke once after everything was corrected. Not a long conversation. Not a healing one. Just necessary. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me. She said she thought she was doing what needed to be done. She said she didn't realize how far she'd gone. I listened. I didn't argue with her version of events. I didn't validate it either. I told her I needed space. That trust, once broken, doesn't reset on a schedule. She nodded. She didn't fight that. We haven't spoken much since. That might sound sad. Sometimes it is. But it's also honest. Relationships don't always survive exposure to truth. And forcing them to can cost more than letting them rest. I moved forward in small ways. I focused on my own life again. On things that had nothing to do with inheritance or fairness or loss. I remembered what it felt like to make plans without bracing myself first. There were still moments that caught me off guard. A song my mom loved. A recipe written in my dad's handwriting. Grief doesn't disappear just because justice shows up. It changes shape. It softens around the edges. Looking back now, I wonder if I'd do it the same way again. What about you? Was the pain necessary to become who you are today? Let me know below. I didn't come out of this stronger in the way people like to talk about. Louder. Sharper. More guarded. I came out clearer. Clear about my boundaries. Clear about my instincts. Clear about the difference between peace and avoidance. I learned that staying calm isn't the same as staying silent. That patience doesn't mean passivity. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the truth speak in its own voice. What I lost wasn't just time or trust. It was an illusion. The idea that love alone keeps things fair. That family automatically means safety. What I gained was less visible. But it stayed. Self-respect. Agency. The ability to stand in a room where I was underestimated and leave without needing anyone's approval. That's not a perfect ending. But it's a real one. And for the first time since our parents passed, that felt like enough. I've had time to think about what all of this really meant. Not just the house. Not the money. Not even the betrayal itself. What stayed with me was the moment I realized I didn't need to become someone else to protect myself. I didn't need to harden my voice, sharpen my words, or prove how hurt I was. I didn't need to win in a way anyone could see. I just needed to stay present long enough for the truth to surface. For a long time after everything settled, I questioned myself. Not my actions, but my instincts. I wondered how I could have missed the signs. How trust could turn into vulnerability without me noticing the shift. Then I realized something important. Trust wasn't my mistake. Blindness wasn't my flaw. Believing in someone didn't make me weak. What would have weakened me was staying silent after I understood what was happening. There's a difference between peace and avoidance. I didn't know that before. I thought keeping the calm meant keeping the relationship intact at any cost. I thought being the reasonable one meant absorbing discomfort so others wouldn't have to feel it. But peace isn't silence. Peace is alignment. It's knowing where you stand, even if no one else approves. It's letting consequences unfold without forcing them. I didn't walk away untouched. I lost a version of my sister I thought I knew. I lost the simplicity of believing family always protects family. And I lost time, the kind you don't get back once it's spent doubting your own reality. But I gained something quieter and far more permanent. I learned to trust myself again. I learned that you don't need to explain your pain for it to be valid. That justice doesn't require cruelty. And that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay composed while the truth does the heavy lifting. So here's my final question. Is it better to forgive and move on, or to make sure they understand exactly what they lost? There's no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Luna Grace's voice travels. Sometimes the most powerful justice isn't loud, it's simply undeniable.